Welcome to Royalty Real's R.E.A.L Podcast. Real conversations, real people, real life.
Yo, what's going on, guys? It's your man, Royalty Real here today, and I'm back with another podcast episode. Today, my guest is Deputy Chief Emada Tingiredes. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
It is an honor. So, I met you at the grand opening for the Children's Institute in Watts. My wife was there because some of her artwork was being shown in the main room there, actually, which is awesome. And we had no idea like where it was going to be shown or how prominent it was going to be, but I had the opportunity to see you, and that was my first time ever even hearing of you. And I heard you speak so eloquently, and I saw that you were very personable, giving out hugs and everything like that. And I asked I told my wife, I said, I want to ask her to be on the podcast. And she was like, go ask. And I was like, how do I even approach her? And the fact that you were so like humble and let me approach you like that was great. So I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity.
Well, I first want to thank you or thank your wife for providing that artwork at a place that is so meaningful to the community. And it had been decades before we saw economic development in that community. So to have that new center there and for artwork to be featured there, specifically a lot of Black artwork, is an inspiration to myself and looking at the artwork and to the community. So I am so glad that you did come up and say hello to me, and I met your beautiful wife, and I'm super excited to come back and develop this relationship, and I love the follow through on it.
Right. It was an awesome day. I took so many pictures of my wife. I kept telling her like, this is big. This is really big. So, and so my wife grew up in the Watts neighborhood as well. So you grew up there as well, right?
Absolutely. I grew up in the area of Belhaven and Lansett, and my aunt lived on Belhaven and Lansett. And so the first 9-10 years of my life, I was in Watts. And then when I was 9 years old, I moved to Southwest area and grew up in the jungle. I can call it the jungle because I grew up there. And so my upbringing and my background has been South Los Angeles, born and raised, also went to high school in the San Fernando Valley. So I am true a Los Angeles girl.
So what was your experience like growing up? Because you grew up in the 80s, right?
I was born in the 70s and grew up in the 80s. You're right. And a lot of people ask me that question, and people say, well, what was it like in South LA in early 1970s? And I tell people it was a community full of pride. It was a beautiful community. You knew your neighbor. You went home before the street lights came on. And if your mama wasn't home, the neighbor knew what you were up to, and the neighbor would tell your mom when she got home. And I have always thought of South Los Angeles as being a community full of love, a community full of pride, and a place that I loved growing up in. It wasn't until the early to mid 80s when crack cocaine epidemic began, street gangs became more visible and took over territories and landmarks, and a lot of our violent crime began to increase. I know in 1965, we had the 65 riots, and the community was just beginning to attempt to settle, in the 70s and 80s after that. And this was introduced into the community for some of the same reasons, a lack of resources in the community, a broken education system, a lack of relationship between the community and law enforcement, and the frustrations that kicked off the Watts riots were becoming much of the frustrations in the South Los Angeles community in the 80s and 90s.
Right, history repeating itself.
Yes, sir.
It's quite unfortunate. So did you when you saw the change happening, did you get discouraged like when you were younger? Because from for it to go to such a community-based environment to, territories being claimed and things like that. How did you cope and how did you not get sucked in? Because it's easier to get sucked in.
I come from a strong background of women in my life. My mother had me when she was 15 years old, and I grew up without a father. And I had to learn real quick how to take care of myself and support my mother in her efforts and what she was trying to do. And so when I turned 10, 11, 12 years old, I felt like I was already 15 or 20 because I had to grow up so fast being with a single parent. Mm-hmm. And when I saw what gangs and drugs were doing to my community, it hurt. I knew the difference between right and wrong because I saw my mother struggling to go back to school, to get her nursing degree, to work 2 jobs, to make ends meet. And I knew that dedication and hard work is what would get me out of the possibility of becoming part of a street gang. I also was blessed enough when my mother did get back on her feet, we moved out of South Los Angeles and we moved to the San Fernando Valley. And at that time, I really felt like I had left a community in despair. Mm-hmm. And one of the main reasons why I decided to become an LAPD officer was I saw what the South Los Angeles community was entering into. At the same time, the Rodney King incident had happened. And I was so disheartened by the actions of those police officers and the impact that it had on the community that I just felt so compelled to come back and serve my community, serve Los Angeles, and then help repair that relationship between the police and the community.
Definitely. I actually was going to ask you that, like, what was your inspiration? Like, did you always want to be a police officer growing up, or was there was there a version of you that wanted to be something else or earlier?
There was a version. I wanted to be a teacher. And I wanted to teach. And I always have had this yearning to want to help others. And my grandmother was a sheriff. And my mother, she became an emergency room nurse at USCMC in the 80s and 90s, where gunshot victims were coming in left and right. And I would hear about her stories and watch her care for victims of crime. And my grandmother, after being in law enforcement, became a teacher. She taught almost 40 years. Oh, wow. And so I grew up wanting to serve and give back and do something different. And the Rodney King incident really just compelled me to change my path and make the decision to become a police officer and serve my community.
How old were you when the Rodney King incident happened?
I was 22 years old.
So you saw that. Were you just disappointed and flabbergasted because the LAPD got exposed during that time for racism, and it seemed like it was rampant within the department. So when you came in, did you figure did you know I'm about to go into an environment, because you joined the police force in 95, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah, I was 22 years old and I was living with some roommates, and I remember watching this on TV and just feeling shocked and really disappointed and hurt at what I was seeing. And I had a lot of questions, and my roommates that I lived with, we had a lot of questions. And as the LAPD began their transformation, I too began my transformation and made that decision to become a police officer, keeping in mind that incident and knowing that I had to do better and that I would do better than those officers that were involved in that Rodney King incident. And so I also, though, had positive experiences with the Los Angeles Police Department.
Mm.
So I came into the experience eyes wide open, but also understanding there was a lot of repair that needed to happen between the Black community and the Los Angeles Police Department. And so I didn't have fears as it relates to me feeling like I was going to join this organization that couldn't do anything right. I knew that the Los Angeles Police Department had a fantastic relationship within the community. The LAPD was the best of the best. I didn't apply to any other law enforcement agency. I wanted to join LAPD to continue to make a difference like the other officers that were policing in the communities, but also to acknowledge that we don't get it right, and to go in and be an example as a Black woman and work in the Black community to change those perceptions and build that trust with the community.
Right. I think it's important for all of us as humans to realize that nobody's perfect. And the fact that you went in there knowing that, but it's important to me to address it and acknowledge that, hey, we make mistakes. Now, how do we fix this mistake? So when you first got in, did you come in with the idea that I'm gonna try to be the change?
I did. I came in, I went through the police academy, and there was a lot that I didn't know. I didn't understand what I was getting myself into. When you go through the Los Angeles Police Department Academy, there's so many new things as a 23, 24-year-old that are new to you. I'd never fired a gun before. I'd never been in a fight before. I had to learn penal codes, vehicle codes. I had to learn to speak Spanish. There were so many things at such a young age that I was introduced to that I embraced. And all of the training, all of that I took with me and knew that the very reason why I was joining this department was to protect and serve the community and build that relationship between the community and law enforcement. And when I went out in the community, I did just that. I knew I wanted to go back to South Los Angeles. When I graduated the academy, I did my probation in West Los Angeles. Then I went to Central and worked in the Skid Row area. As soon as I could get back to South Los Angeles, I did. And I really began to listen to the community, not just talk at the community, but to hear and understand the community, to understand the culture and the needs, to look at things from a lens of how can I help make this better? How can I fix this? And throughout my almost 28 years in this organization, I've approached every community from that aspect.
So I have a question. What does the term community policing mean to you? Because for me, community policing is establishing relationships with the people within the community. I believe that the officers should be known by pretty much name or at least face in the neighborhood, because that makes you feel so much more comfortable to approach them when something happens. If you feel uncomfortable, you can approach, let's say a random name, Officer Dave, because you know who he is. So for me, that's why it's so important to build a relationship. And don't be separate from the community, be part of the community. So what does community policing mean to you?
We have the same definition. I do believe community policing is about engaging and getting to know people in the community on various levels, to meet people where they're at and grow from there. I'm the commanding officer of the Community Safety Partnership Bureau, which is a relationship-based policing philosophy that the Los Angeles Police Department started in 2011. And this community safety partnership policing philosophy was actually implemented and put in conjunction with a civil rights attorney, Connie Rice, who came to the LAPD and came to the Housing Authority and said, we've got to do better. We've got to police our low socioeconomic communities better. We need to build relationships. We need to work with intervention and prevention agencies. We've got to get the community to trust law enforcement, and law enforcement's got to begin to trust the community and hold each other accountable. So to me, community policing just isn't having an event or a coffee with a cop. That's community engagement.
Right.
Community policing is relationship based.
Right.
It's utilizing our partners to look at the root causes of conditions in our community, and then working with the community resource network to help make change and make the community safe. And if we can do that collectively while building those relationships and trust, we can begin to make a difference in public safety in our communities.
Definitely 100%. So I did some research on you, and I was following your career, and it just seems like your trajectory is just climbing up the ranks. Did you have any idea that you would move up in the way that you did?
No, never in my wildest dreams. I became a senior lead officer on the department. I thought I would retire at that rank. And the senior lead officers are territorial imperative. They have a basic car in the community that they work in. They work very closely with neighborhood watches and businesses and really address some of the quality of life issues. And that was a position that I held for just about 6 years in South Los Angeles and the other part of South LA where I grew up. And I loved being a senior lead officer. At one point in my career, I thought, I want to continue to grow within this organization to teach younger officers how to lead and work in a community. And the next thing I know, I became a sergeant, and then I became a lieutenant, and then I became a captain. And when I became a captain, I went back to Watts to work as a captain in the community of Watts. And that was extremely impactful for me. And I was working as a captain in Watts in 2020 when we had the civil unrest after the murder of George Floyd. And I remember community members reaching out to me, specifically from Watts, saying, this is a tragedy that this happened. But I want to tell you, we've experienced riots in this community and we don't want to go back there. We are happy that we've created these relationships. We have a long way to go, but how are you doing? Are we good? Let's do a check-in with us to ensure that we prevent things like this happening. Yeah. And when that happened to me as a captain, I was really able to look at the impact of relationships and how it can change an entire community when we work alongside each other. We utilize a truth and reconciliation process to begin to understand one another and respect each other. And when an incident does happen, we can come to the table to have those discussions rather than destroy our community and move backwards. And so I think the opportunity that came after the civil unrest was another promotion for me. The chief promoted me from a captain to a deputy chief, and that's only the second time in the history of the Los Angeles Police Department for someone to promote from a captain to a deputy chief. And I was promoted to help create and implement a bureau to solidify the work that I had been doing in the community alongside my officers. And never in my wildest dreams would I think that would happen, and I would have the ability to continue to embed this relationship-based policing philosophy throughout the LAPD.
So that is so awesome. So as a woman, did you face any struggles or difficulties in the department or even within the community? Because a lot of times people see the police department as the boys club, you know? So as a woman, was it hard for you to climb the ranks, and any difficulties within?
That's a great question. And right now, when I think about, hear you ask that question, I think about what we have going on right now across the country with the 30 by 30 initiative. We've had police chiefs across the country sign a pledge to state they want their law enforcement agencies to be 30% women by the year 2030. When I came on the LAPD, there are very few women in the roll call room, what I would consider very few women, but but I think about the women that came before me when there were very few women in the roll call room. So the LAPD has come a long way from the 60s and 70s, into the 80s, 90s, and in 2000s. Right now, our organization is just at about 18% female. It is a very male dominated profession. And as a woman, I've always told myself, I feel like I have to work harder and work stronger and be stronger. But some of the best mentors that I've had in this organization have been men. I'm currently the second vice president of the Los Angeles Women Police Officers and Associates. It's called LAPOA. And some of our primary duties and efforts are to embrace the women within our organization, to encourage them to promote, to help them prepare for oral interviews and test taking, to mentor them, to guide them, and empower them to take that next step to becoming leaders within our organization.
That is so awesome to me. I'm just thankful to live in a time where we're seeing women really do awesome things, because I knew it was possible, because my mom was a strong woman. My mom passed in 2020, and she was always a leader, and she was able to promote within her company, Kaiser, just like you, she always moved up despite what people thought she was. So to see that is awesome. So the next question I have is, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Do you have any hopes of being chief, maybe, or anything like that?
Well, first, I want to acknowledge your mother. I'm so sorry. My son passed away in February of 2022. He was 22 years old and tragically taken from me and killed in a car crash. And so I'm sorry for your loss with that. And
Serious condolences to you as well.
oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And then second, something we have in common is my mother worked for Kaiser for 35 years.
Oh, wow.
And she started at Kaiser in West Los Angeles, and then Kaiser in Panorama City. And she just recently retired, and she moved up through the ranks and left as a nurse practitioner in OBGYN. So kudos. Our mothers kind of had the same path. So congratulations for that. But and as it relates to strong women and where do I see myself 5 years from now, I would like to be a police chief. And I would like to be a police chief for multiple reasons. The first would be to lead an organization where you have people who go into this profession who truly take on this role because they want to protect and serve and help. And there's nothing more rewarding than leading a group of people that have hearts and compassion and empathy that want to serve. And I get great pleasure in leading and guiding people like that in our communities. Second, I have such a passion for this city, for Los Angeles, for communities, and I am uplifted by the communities themselves. They motivate me. And so 5 years from now, I'm hoping that I can continue leading in this relationship-based policing philosophy, getting communities through tough times, working through the conflict in a respectable manner, and having the opportunity as a leader within an organization to do that.
That is awesome. And I'm very observant. So when I was watching you at the Children's Institute grand opening, I just saw that you were very genuine. And so I really hope for the best for you. And I could see you being that kind of leader that will connect everyone, because you connect with people on a genuine and personal level. So
thank you.
So another thing I want to ask, coming from where you grew up in Watts to being invited to the State of the Union address, how was that?
Incredible. And I had a tough time with that invite because I felt like the community should have been invited there. That shouldn't have been me. That should have been the community. And in 2015, my husband at the time was a captain working in Watts, and had worked in Watts as a captain for over 8 years, and really began to understand and embrace and love the community of South Los Angeles, and specifically in the Watts community. And at the time, the Community Safety Partnership Program had been going for about 5 years. And our officers had started a little league football team, the Watts Bears, and now they're called the Watts Rams. And there was an HBO special that Bryant Gumbel had done, and President Barack Obama and his wife saw the special on the Watts Bears program, where we had officers in the community coaching kids, building relationships. And lo and behold, we received an invitation by Michelle Obama to the State of the Union address for the work that the community had been doing alongside the LAPD in the community of Watts. So I was absolutely honored to represent the community of Watts, so humbled by the experience, and something that I'll never forget.
Did you get the opportunity to actually talk to President Obama and First Lady Michelle at the time?
I did get the opportunity to meet with and talk to Michelle Obama. My husband got to meet with and talk to President Obama. Wow. I watched the State of the Union from the movie theater at the White House while my husband went and attended in person. It was just an amazing experience.
That really has to be. That is something amazing that you got to, any president, but the fact that it was the first Black president, and to be receiving such an honor, but like you said, it was for the community as well. So yes. Do you feel like a spotlight came on the community after that?
I do. I could feel a sense of pride from the community. I when the community found out, they were just overjoyed. It was so funny because he says, I hope the president says the word Watts. We want him to say the word Watts. But everybody was tuned in, and they were watching, and they were hoping he'd say the word Watts. And he didn't necessarily say that, but he did mention the South Los Angeles community. And just by the sheer presence of having law enforcement there and acknowledging that we can make a difference working together with the community was huge. There was a sense of pride from the community of Watts. There was a sense of pride across Los Angeles, and a sense of pride for our law enforcement agency to be noticed like that, and for this type of policing philosophy to be acknowledged. When they had the president's 21st century policing recommendations that came out, the Community Safety Partnership policing philosophy was part of those recommendations. So full circle from 2015 to 21st century policing was just an amazing opportunity for law enforcement and the police to really acknowledge how far we've come.
Wow, that is something else. That is something else. I really do see a sense of pride from people that come from Watts, because my wife is, like I said, my wife is from Watts, and she has a very strong sense of pride for the neighborhood and everything else. So, yeah. So that is awesome. The next question I have for you is something that's very personal to me, which is the homelessness issue in LA. And it's personal to me because I myself was homeless. I was one of those people that were on, like Skid Row and places like that. I was homeless throughout different areas in California. So how do you feel like we can address this issue and have an understanding within the community?
It's such a prevalent issue, and I think it's one of the most important issues in the city of Los Angeles right now. And there's so many different components that we have to look at when we talk about our unhoused communities. First and foremost, no one should have to live on a sidewalk and not get the care and the resources that they need to get them on their feet and get them housed. And congratulations to you for working through that and having that experience and becoming of yourself to give back in this platform that you are now. Congratulations to you.
Thank you.
And I know that oftentimes our unhoused individuals feel like they're treated as if they don't exist.
Yes.
And we can't address a problem if we don't see the individuals that are experiencing this challenge. And so I think first and foremost, we have to look at the root cause of why people are becoming homeless and understand that. And also understand that one solution for one may not work for the other. We have to absolutely look at the mental wellness of individuals that are unhoused. Is there a narcotics issue? Is there a mental health concern that individual needs? Is there a physical ailment that person has? Did a family just live paycheck to paycheck, then they lost their jobs and they're newly unhoused? There are so many different reasons that people become unhoused, and one size doesn't fit all. We have to have a concerted effort, a state of emergency with teams of individuals, from clinicians to mental health workers, to job resource, to assess every single individual and what their needs are, and then have different components set up to filter these individuals to seek the services that they need to get them on their feet. No one should have to live in filth. No one should have to live on a sidewalk when it's raining or hot outside. It is a state of emergency, and what's most important is to figure out why it's occurring and then have a safety net to prevent that from happening. And it's not easy, it's very difficult. And there are a lot of reasons why: people losing jobs, lack of education, mental health. There's so many things and so many reasons why the problem has grown this big.
So true. And to view the community, the homeless community as a monolith is a mistake. A lot of people view it as, it's just one type of person. There are addicts included in that. There are people who do, like you said, who have mental health issues, or sometimes it was just as simple as, like you said, living paycheck to paycheck and losing a job, or getting sick and not getting paid for that week. I met so many people when I was there that I had a better understanding afterwards, because I lived with them, and there was people out there that were just as good hearted as I was. Sometimes it was, I met a guy who was out there because his family was accepted into a shelter and he wasn't. They lost their home, and so he had to watch his family be okay, which is, as a man, I'm sure he was happy that they were, but he was probably more sad because he couldn't be around them. He had to live separately from them, and then having resources to get back on your feet is very difficult.
It is very difficult, and from the law enforcement perspective, we can't police our way out of this issue. We have to lead with compassion. We have to understand the issues. We have to be prepared to have a resource to give to our officers so that they can plug these families into a shelter rather than respond with handcuffs. It's very sensitive, and we have to understand how to address these public health concerns with a broader lens and depend on our city resources to help us resolve this issue from a holistic approach rather than a policing approach.
Do you feel like it would help to have clinicians and social workers respond to some of these calls when they come out? Because I feel like if the officers aren't trained, then they don't know how to handle certain situations like that. It's not just as simple as coming and putting handcuffs on someone when they just need to talk. Hey, how are you doing today? Type of thing.
Absolutely. And the LAPD, we are fortunate enough to have programs like that. We have mental health clinicians riding with police officers to respond to radio calls. We also have domestic assault response teams where a clinician will ride with a police officer to domestic violence radio calls. After 2020, an alternative complaint dispatch center was created where a lot of the 911 calls involving mental health issues or concerns are diverted from police officers and diverted to clinicians, Dee Hirsch, to be able to dispatch the experts who can respond and get that individual the care and the help that they need rather than a police officer. I think it's vital that we work together, that we understand each other's roles. Look, for decades, the LAPD was the only entity that could be called 24/7 to respond to a cat in a tree or a neighbor dispute or a shooting in progress. And some of that responsibility has to be owned by our mental health, by our Department of Mental Health, by Children and Family Services, by our nonprofit organizations. Collectively, all of us with our different expertise have to look at this issue from those different angles to make the community whole.
It is really nice to see that there are people that do understand and are willing to face this issue. And I don't think it's going to be a one single solution to this issue. There has to be several, and it has to be a coming together of the minds to figure this out, because there's some people that won't be able to escape that. There are some people that maybe won't be able to be rehabilitated to the point where they can function normally. So there has to be maybe some facilities that can house these people and treat them with respect, because I believe that every human on this earth deserves respect.
I agree. And at one point, we had facilities to house individuals that were unable to care for themselves. And you said something so important. You said to treat these folks with respect and dignity and an understanding of their personal issues or concerns. And if you can have facilities that are able to accept people, to get them the help that they need and to heal them, that's so critical. There are so few of those facilities, and there isn't a resource for an officer to refer someone like that to because of a lack of having those institutions. And so again, it's not for everybody, but there are certain instances where people just cannot take care of themselves. And we owe it to them to get them to a place where they can be helped to do so.
Yes, I 100% agree. So you addressed the time in LA, how in 2020 when George Floyd was murdered, and the Black Lives Matter movement, but that was a movement that was the culmination of a lot of hurt throughout the entire United States, from way back Rodney King to Trayvon Martin and Mike Brown. So you as an officer, what is your viewpoint of the Black Lives Matter movement, and do you understand where the hurt is coming from?
I absolutely understand where the hurt is coming from. We started off your show talking about history repeating itself. They say history always writes shotgun, right? I understand the hurt. I understand the pain. I understand the anger. It is absolutely unacceptable to have what happened to George Floyd. Every officer was hurt by that incident and knew it was wrong. And so I understand the despair and the anger that grew from that. And, I mentioned earlier about the 1965 Watts riots and that being a boiling point and the culmination of so many broken systems. And I think what happened after George Floyd is very similar to that, a boiling point. There have been incidences in law enforcement where there have been young Black men that are unarmed that have been shot and killed.
Right.
And those instances, now that we have videos and cell phones and technology, they enter everybody's living room and everybody's able to view that and see that. And so I understand, first and foremost, police work is so unpredictable. And an officer is responding to a situation after someone has picked up the phone to call 911.
Right.
And I remember when we got digital in-car video, at the time it was Chief Charlie Beck. He was talking about the rolling out of the digital in-car video. And he had made a statement about, is the community ready to see the real world of policing? And then when you rolled out body-worn video, to be able to see an officer's actions and be transparent on what occurred when that officer drove up to that location, had the interaction, and that officer-involved shooting occurred. And so technology has changed and our transparency has changed in a way that people wouldn't even imagine 20 years ago. And one of the things that the LAPD does to build that trust with the community is we release our officer-involved shootings within 45 days of an incident so that the community can see what occurred and gain a better understanding of our actions and the actions of the individual that we've interacted with. And we don't get it right all the time. And it has horrific consequence. And the incident that happened with George Floyd, some would say, took us back to 1965. So I understood the anger, I understood the pain, I understand the call for accountability. And the Los Angeles Police Department, we went through a consent decree. We had the Rampart scandal. Mm-hmm. We had incidents that happened within our organization in which we've acknowledged. And one of our core values is quality through continuous improvement. We've acknowledged, we've self-assessed, and we got through that consent decree with better systems in place, with a better review of our uses of force, with early warning signals when we have an officer that's involved in multiple uses of force. An action item is created, and we're able to look at that officer, look at his body-worn video, listen to the digital in-car video, sit down and have a discussion. And so things have changed in policing. Our community has to demand that we police constitutionally, and our law enforcement agencies have to be willing to understand that we need to change and meet the expectations of the community, but vice versa. The community has to be willing to build that relationships with law enforcement and help us as we address some of the issues in the community, like guns and crime and the violence that we're seeing that has increased over the past 2 years in the city.
How do you feel when you see officers, because a lot of times on the news, you'll see officers that are so angry with the fact that they're being held accountable. And so they have visceral responses a lot of times, saying the Black Lives Matter movement is wrong. They don't understand it's not all cops, or, all of this thing. How do you feel? Because I feel like you want to see this change as well, because you need to be held accountable. How do you feel seeing those officers who disrespect your, the a movement like that, and also disrespect the badge, to be honest to me, because they don't understand that the people, you're responsible to the people that you serve.
I will tell you, nobody likes a police officer that breaks the law and treats the community unfairly. They'll be the first to tell you it's unacceptable. And when incidents like the George Floyd incident happened, I spoke to so many police officers who publicly, privately, in their personal lives denounced that incident and what occurred.
Right.
And after the trial, there was still conversation about justice, and that could have been prevented. And the discussions with law enforcement and with officers within the LAPD were, would we have done it different? We have use of force policies. We de-escalate. We give people time and space. Did we force an incident? We have to have resources to help us address someone who may be experiencing a mental health crisis, to slow down, to understand that individual and identify who else can help us resolve this issue using the least amount of force necessary to resolve it. And so I think when officers saw this incident happen, and then the response that came after, there was a lot of hurt on law enforcement's side, because people like me who've never been involved in an officer involved shooting felt like all cops were bad, and that there was this wave of all cops are bad, we don't support them, and we're going to defund every police officer and every law enforcement agency. And I think where leadership comes in is being able to explain to your officers the hurt and the pain and what the true meaning behind that defund word meant.
Right.
And from my perspective, it was help identify additional resources to help law enforcement with some of the root causes and issues going on in our community, to provide funding to mental health, to provide funding to our schools, to stop LAPD from being that 24-hour, 7-day-a-week response to public health issues. And then telling the officers, remember your why, or asking them their why. Yes, this is happening. There's protests across the country. There were some police departments who had to shut their doors where protesters took over the police station. We still have to serve the public. We still had 911 calls to respond to, and we still had a job to do. So there were so many different things going on in the year of 2020. And something that I stood true to was knowing that the LAPD had come such a long way, and that we have implemented so many different systems and policies and procedures to help prevent incidents like that, and to stand firm in that, but also understand the cry and the pain, and know that it's fragile, trust is fragile, and that we have to continue working on making ourselves better.
Definitely. You touched on something that I was going to ask as well about the defund the police movement. I wanted to know your opinion on it because, like you said, it wasn't about taking the police off the streets. It was about diverting funds to other things that could help. Because like I said, I believe that every cause shouldn't have to take an officer to come out. It could be as simple as a therapist. How you doing? Let me get you some help.
Yeah.
Officer could be better used over here. So it wasn't taking money away, it was diverting funds. And I think a lot of people were fearful, even in the community as well. Don't take the police off the streets. It's going to be less safe. And
Yes.
They didn't have that understanding. I also think addressing the issue would help a level of bravery, because evil thrives when good men do nothing. So I feel like in those situations when you have people like the officers that stand by and just watch these things occur, you have to have a level of bravery and step up and say, stop. And I think that would have prevented George Floyd from losing his life. And I think a lot of other times when there's officers that are here that see this, somebody has to be the cool head and say, hey, let's de-escalate, let's calm down, because you are human, right? I understand that an officer can have a bad day as well. So the other officers on the scene need to, hey, calm down. Let's have a type of calm. Let's go over here and you talk to you, and I'll go talk to him or something like that. I believe that. Do you believe that officers need to be more brave like that and step out?
Absolutely. And you're talking about duty to intervene. And we're currently getting ready to embark on active bystander law enforcement training, where every single officer within the Los Angeles Police Department will go through this active bystandership training. And it is so pivotal in making a difference between something tragic happening or something going really well. When I came on the LAPD in 1995 as a probationary officer, I had an incident that happened. Had a training officer who slapped one of my arrestees, and I'm barely 7 months on the job, and I knew the difference between right and wrong. And I did intervene and I did tell someone, and that person is no longer on the department. And that happens more often than we know, and then that the community knows. And so it is important that an officer has the tools and the training and knows when to interject. But I will tell you, recently, all these videos coming out of people fighting. There was a recent video in a parking structure where a young woman was kicked that went viral. There's these fights that are happening on sidewalks. And I'm amazed at how many people stand there and film, but don't intervene. And what type of culture are we creating by filming it, but no one intervening and saying, whoa, this isn't right. We've got to step in here. And that's really a culture shift that we as a community, we as people need to change. If we become complacent and allow things to happen because we don't want to step up, people get hurt. And that's no different in law enforcement. An officer will see something that isn't right and knows to step in without being retaliated against to stop that action. And I think that now more than ever, because of the increase in some of the robberies and follow-home robberies and fights on the sidewalk, that everybody has a duty to intervene. I'm not telling them to be police officers, but just the other day, I don't know if you saw, I think it was yesterday, at a restaurant, a gentleman came and punched someone and took his wallet, and the store owner went out and held the individual until the police arrived. And so technically that wasn't his job to do. He's not a police officer, but at the same time, right, he was compelled to intervene to do something.
I'm thankful for people like you who have that strong moral compass despite adversity or despite what may happen. And I hope more people take this and are able to have the bravery to stop something, because you if you know what's right and wrong, you can make a difference in several situations. Sometimes it's as simple as saying, don't say that. Yeah. Don't talk that way.
Yep.
So it comes in the actions. The last question I have for you is about gangs. And I grew up in a family where I have such a diverse family as far as that goes. I have family that are tech professionals and everything. Like me, I want to be a politician one day. I'm a musician. I do a lot of different other things. Then I also have the family members that are gang members and addicts. And so, but I understand and I still love them. How do you feel is the best way to address the gang issue in LA?
I first and foremost, and I think this has been my theme throughout, is we have to humanize everybody. We have to humanize everybody. The second thing is hurt people hurt people. And oftentimes people join gangs to have a sense of belonging, young men, young Black men join gangs because they may have had a father that was imprisoned and the gang took them in, and that's where they felt their comfort. And so we have to humanize individuals and meet them where they're at and understand their why. It is so important that us as law enforcement professionals utilize our intervention and prevention services to build that rapport and relationship with the gangs in our communities. I am a huge advocate for gang intervention workers, for individuals that make the decision to go out in their community and help young Black and brown men put down the guns and replace it with a resource or a job or counseling or hope. And the city has the Mayor's Gang Reduction and Youth Development that supports intervention and prevention in some of the most gang entrenched communities throughout Los Angeles. And I have a great rapport with the intervention workers from the community. Oftentimes people say they're undervalued, they're not paid enough, they don't get benefits, and their work should be supported. I agree with that 100%. It goes along with the question that you asked about allocating resources to other entities outside of police to make communities safe. If we can support and empower people from the community that grew up in the community that can help prevent gang crime, then why not invest in it and empower them and create an infrastructure for that to happen? And so I believe in gang intervention workers. I believe in them being empowered to do the right thing, to make change in their community, to prevent crime. And sometimes, I'm going to keep it real, sometimes you just got to go to jail. You cannot deprive a community, shoot someone, rob someone, and not have a consequence for it. But here's where the system falls short. If I commit a crime and I shoot someone, or I do a robbery, and I go into the criminal justice system, what's there to rehabilitate me?
Yes.
Why did I do that? And if I'm in this system, and I'm getting the resources I need so I don't repeat that action. I started off by saying hurt people hurt people. You know, I used to tell people, and this sounds controversial coming from a police officer, I'd rather have someone gets out of prison and they go to a street corner and they sell drugs because they can't get a job because they're a parolee, but they got to put food on the table and take care of their family. What other option do they have? So there's part of me that understands why that happens, but we have to fix and come up with a solution to prevent that person from standing in a corner to sell drugs to make ends meet for his family. So our reentry system and the resources that individuals need after committing crimes is critical to breaking the cycle and the violence in our communities.
Definitely. Do you feel like that there's a way to work with, because you said about preventing, people from joining gangs, which is important because, that's how they keep recruiting, and, they get the young kids and they do what they see. So how do you feel about the active gang members right now? And do you think that there's a way to work with them? And also the reform gang members, do you feel like the police can work with them and actually give them maybe opportunities to work with the police department?
Yes, and that's really what our gang intervention workers are. A lot of them are former gang members who go out into the community and try to work with the active gang members. Hey, listen, there's an active gang member who may not want to have a conversation with me as a police officer, but he will be willing to have a conversation with someone that was a former gang member to help him change his life around. And if I, as a police officer, can empower that gang interventionist to do that, then I'm open to that. And we do that. I think that we have gang units and gang enforcement details, and their role is to go out and prevent violent crime and back and forth shootings. And that's their lane operationally. But you have to have more than one response to a deep entrenched culture. So if law enforcement sticks to being strategic and trying to prevent active gang members from committing crimes, but you have civilian gang intervention workers working on the other side of the coin, attempting to prevent that, and then you have resources and jobs on the other side, you have this holistic approach to decreasing current gang activity and getting them to put down the guns and invest their time and their commitment to something meaningful, then I think that we can make a difference. And we've seen a change in gangs in 10 to 15 years. We've seen a huge change. A lot of it has gone online through social media. A lot of fights and issues really are from things that occur online and then result out on the street because someone said something wrong to someone, so I'm going to bring a gun. A lot of this too is about conflict resolution. Why are young Black and brown men responding to conflict with guns? We have to fix that. It's not okay to take a gun and go take somebody out because they made you upset. So again, is it our reentry system and the lack of tools in mental health training for these individuals to not respond in that manner? And that's why we have to look at these things from a lens of a public health approach and not just a suppression law enforcement approach.
Right. I'm really thankful for you coming on. For me, like I said, coming from someone who's been homeless, also I was formerly incarcerated when I was 18, 19 years old. To be able to have a conversation with an officer, this is an honor. And to have, I feel like this is just the start of something. Like, I feel like more people just have the conversation with someone. Be willing to talk to somebody, reach out to an officer. Officers reach out to somebody else. Like, you never know how you can make a change because we're all people. We all relate to each other on some way. We may disagree on solutions, but we agree that of how we want things to be. We want peace. We want to get along. Like, we all want that same thing. And I think that it's possible. Just talk, have conversations. And that's what this podcast is about. Having real conversations with real people. So I thank you for coming on. I appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I hope it's not the last time either. Keep pushing, keep being a voice, keep asking the tough questions. And I couldn't be more honored than to just have a conversation and talk to you about some key critical things that make or break our community. So thank you.
Definitely. Well, I love you guys. Subscribe, like, all that good stuff. Peace.
In verse 1, I mentioned this heavy weight. It's something I deal with to this very day. In January of 2020, my precious mother was taken from me. I still can't believe how intense the pain. It's funny how sun shines and commence the rain. I wonder if when I talk you can sense the strain. Even when I clear my head, this remains. Visions of your face, visions of the past.